Okay, thank you, ladies. This morning we are in Ruth chapter 4, and we want to finish this little special book. In a Christian's life, there are problems, tragedies, trials, and difficulties, lurking predators, slippery edges, hairpin curves that temporarily cause a Christian to go backwards in order that later, by God's grace, he may go forward. But all this hazardous, twisted road does not let him see very far ahead. There are frequent signs that say the best is yet to come. The book of Ruth is one of those signs. It is written to encourage and give us hope that all the perplexing turns, ups and downs in our life are going somewhere. They do not lead off a cliff or to a dead end. Now this week, my wife and I received this little card in the mail. It was sent by Sarah, one of my former students at Moody. And as I got to know her, I found her to be just like my wife, really special, unusually committed to God. And I thought, no man will ever be good enough for Sarah. Like, no man, except one, was good enough for her. And then I heard that Sarah had a boyfriend named Jonah. And I thought, oh, man, I know good and well, I don't even have to get to know this guy. He's not going to measure up to Sarah. But as I got to know him, I found the guy was awesome. He was just as sharp, spiritually committed to the Lord as Sarah was. Like Boaz and Ruth. The book of Ruth uses the word Kayil, worthy of Boaz, Kayil, worthy of Ruth. God prepared those two for each other. And I think he prepared Jonah and Sarah for each other. And so Sarah graduated from Moody, and Jonah graduated from another Christian college. I don't remember now which one it is, but after they got married, they moved to Wisconsin. And since they moved up there, I imagine, 4 or 5 years ago, he's been working as a youth pastor in a church up there. Okay, so Sarah has 2 young children, and we knew she was pregnant and in her 9th month due to bear a child. And so here's a card. On one side, it shows one picture of Sarah with this newborn that was just born. Now on the back, there's a reference to Habakkuk 3. And then I want you to listen to, I think it's just 3 brief sentences she wrote. And so I were puzzled. We didn't know what she was getting at. Listen, this card's design was chosen by Jonah, her husband, before he became sick. Didn't know he was sick. We came up with this verse and message together to send after our sweet girl was born. Please pray with me for the day that Jonah can meet his precious newest daughter, Sarah, that he's never seen. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean he died? And now she's looking forward to when Jesus comes back, and the husband, the dad, can see this newborn. So we called Sarah and said, Sarah, what's going on? What do you mean on this card? Now, long story short, recently, he came down with a fever and started feeling bad. He felt so bad, he went to the ER. And they examined him and said, you just got some sort of virus. Just go home and rest, you'll be okay. So he did, went home. Then he got very sore in his right shoulder. And it was so bad he had to go back to the ER. Now they examined him, and they diagnosed him with, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, necrosis, which means, it's a Greek word which means to die, necrosis fasciata, which I think now means the dying of your muscles. And as she explained it to me, bacteria entered his body, they think, through his shoulder, and then it quickly began to spread throughout his body, killing his skin. Now, you can't live without skin. Killing his skin and shutting down his organs. You can't live without your organs. And I think he went into a coma, and they told Sarah, your husband may die. if he survives the next 12 hours, he's got half a chance to live. And before those 12 hours are up, the physicians came and said, your husband is not going to live. He's dying. But God had a different idea. He pulled him through. He lived. Now, as a result of that, he's in the burn unit. Now, he hadn't been burned, but he's in the burn unit because so much skin on his body has died. And they've got to graft more on to keep him alive. You just can't live without skin. His organs have begun to recover. Now he can breathe on his own. His kidneys have not recovered. They think they're starting to. He's lost all the muscle in this arm. He can't even lift. He doesn't have any muscles to lift his arm. He's in a wheelchair. He has to learn how to talk again. He has to learn how to walk again. So this young lady, and then as her husband was in a coma and they said he may not die, then she went into labor and gave birth to this third child, not knowing whether her husband was going to live or not. So Sarah, now she's up to this, and she responded magnificently to all of this. But she's just exhausted by what's happened. And I asked them, well, how are you all doing financially? I'm so glad to know. She said, our church has rallied around us. They've been so helpful. They've contributed to our expenses, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm telling you this, that I would like us to pray for Jonah's full recovery. Now, it's obvious to me. I mean, it's really clear. And this disease, she said, is extremely rare. I've never heard anything like it. I mean, we all have bacteria. You get cut, and bacteria comes in. But the body is such that it can usually deal with it and kill the bacteria. But this didn't. And it just spread quickly throughout his whole body. I can't remember what I was about to say. Oh, yeah. It's obvious to me. God let him get that illness. And it's obvious to me God decided this young man was going to live. Now that raises a question. Why? I take refuge in Mark 7:37. The Lord has done all things well. He has some wonderful purpose or purposes in that difficulty. And probably in years to come, they're going to start manifesting themselves, and probably we'll only see down here some of the purposes he had. It won't be till we get to heaven that all of the good reasons God had for letting that happen are made clear to us. Now, in all our setbacks in our lives as believers, God is planning for our benefit and joy. Remember, it was Jesus who said, blessed are those who mourn. Sarah has been mourning. Why blessed? What does blessed mean? You will be on the receiving end of the advantages, benefits, and good things in life, for they shall be comforted. Now, that last line means, why are they going to be comforted? Because the morning will come to an end, and now here comes God's good blessings out of what caused the morning. When a beautiful love story is developing and Boaz and Ruth want to marry, there are two roadblocks that appear on their path. Firstly, another man, not Boaz, has a prior claim and right to marry her. The book shows that God is for us in all our roadblocks. He's for us. He opens the door no man can shut, and he shuts the door nobody can open. In all these disappointing difficulties, God is not just showing up after the trouble and cleaning it up. He is preparing our course and managing the troubles with far-reaching purposes for our good and for the good of Christ. This setback of another man with a prior claim on Ruth is caused by righteousness, by Boaz doing the right thing. But God turns the other man to decline marrying Ruth. The second roadblock was Ruth's inability to have children. Now, you remember she was married to Mahlon for a decade, and she never could conceive. But friends pray that she'll be like Rachel and Leah, who gave birth to Israel's 12 patriarchs. And from those 12 sons came all the Hebrews. That is, her friends are praying that God will bless her with distinguished children who will give her a place in the line leading to the Messiah. Then a surprising shift occurs in verses 14 through 17 of chapter 4. The focus falls on Naomi. Why? The book began with her losses and it ends with her gains. It starts with death. It concludes with the birth of her grandson. 2 sons are lost and a grandson is given to Naomi. Heaven reverses her situation. If we trust God consistently, we find that all our complaints against Him are unwarranted. Our circumstances may truly be bitter, but God is at work for our good, whether we can see it or not. All these things work for us, not against us. 1 Peter 2:6 says, he who persists in trusting the Lord will never be disappointed. This book was penned to help us see the signposts of grace in our lives that are visible. And it helps us trust God when the fog is so thick we can't see the road. God has been wisely and lovingly at work in Naomi's setbacks. When she lost her husband and sons, God then gave her Ruth, Boaz, and Obed. Obed is her grandson. But the story doesn't end in a little Judean village with an old grandmother hugging a new grandson. Gradually, this is what we're going to see today. We realize that all along something far greater has been in the making. God was preparing for the world's ruler. From King David would come the greatest ruler of the earth, the Son of God. Now, I want to sum up chapter 4 of Ruth in this sentence. God's sovereign hand gives Boaz a wife, a son, and a place in both Israel's royal family and in the messianic lineage. And the passage breaks down in these 4 little paragraphs. First 9 verses, Boaz becomes a redeemer. Second paragraph, he becomes a husband. Third paragraph, he becomes a father. And the last paragraph, he becomes a link to King David. And from King David came his greater son, the Son of God. Now, we need to remember what we touched on before. This is a big factor in the book of Ruth. Now, last Sunday, Basima told me, remember she comes from Iraq. Isn't that it? Iraq. And she said, you have to, and she was right. She said, you have to interpret the book of Ruth from their culture. That is the Middle East, not from our culture. And she's right about that. So the levirate marriage, and I want you to remember this, if a Jewish man dies childless, his brother or some other relative, if not a brother, marries his sister-in-law and produces a son as an heir for the deceased relative. And that brother is called the Redeemer. A Redeemer, now we have to think of a Redeemer. When we think of Redeemer, we think of Jesus. And of course, He is the Redeemer par excellence. But here, the Redeemer is not Jesus. It's that when you're in need, your family relative who is one, he may be one of your redeemers. There may be more than one redeemer in the family, but hopefully you've got a redeemer who, when you're in trouble and need help, he comes along and gives you the helping hand, whatever the issue is. So that is what's meant. We're going to encounter the word redeemer again today. So let's remember now, in chapter 1, Elimelech left Bethlehem in a famine. He was in the promised land. God promised to provide his needs in the promised land, but he didn't believe that, so he bails out and he goes to Moab. And there he dies, I think, as divine discipline. And his 2 sons, they did worse. They each married a Moabite woman, which the Old Testament prohibited them doing, and both sons died, I think, as divine discipline. Then in chapter 2, when the famine is over in Bethlehem, Naomi goes back and Ruth accompanies her. And it's in chapter 2 that Ruth goes to work gleaning grain that's left over to support herself, and Naomi and God leads her feet to step on the field of Boaz. Then in chapter 3 that we looked at last week, remember Naomi got involved. She sensed that Boaz and Ruth have an interest in each other, but Boaz is slow as all get out. My wife tells me, in fact, she tells everybody, that I was really slow in showing interest in her. And I guess I was, but I just didn't have an experience with women. I didn't ask girls for a date. In fact, I did go on 2 dates, but the girls asked me. And I was really upset when they asked me to date. I didn't want to go on a date with those girls, but I got shoved into it. I got talked into it. And so I just didn't, I never held a girl's hand. I never kissed a girl. I didn't want to. I had some interest in girls, but it was very mild. And what's more, I really didn't think any girl would be interested in me, so I was extremely slow when Sue came along, and my interest was building in me, but I did nothing with it until my stepdad got involved and said, I think this young girl from North Carolina is interested in you. Oh, that built a fire under me. And so that very night, I told Sue of my interest in her, and she said, well, I don't know what's taking you so long, but I want you to know I have the same interest in you. So I can understand Boaz being slow as a snail. So Naomi knows that, and she goes to work and thinks, well, let's get this show on the road so it goes somewhere. So she sends, you remember now, she sends Ruth to the threshing floor after all the grain's been harvested, and they've been winnowing it and getting it ready to sell. And she says, he's going to be down there tonight, and I want you to go there and hide until all the servants are gone, let him fall asleep, and then uncover his feet, his cold feet will wake him up, and now you all can compare notes. And so, long story short, to you and me, this doesn't look good. A man and a woman sleeping alone in a big building, they're not married to each other. And the commentators really struggle with that. And the commentators said, man, we don't like the way this looks. But I appreciate one commentator says, yeah, this looks bad, but I'm willing to make the best of it. And so it was a test. It was a test that they do what's right. They could have fallen into sin. I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with students at Moody. Like one couple, they weren't married, but at Christmas break, they were going back home out in California. And I just woke up early one morning, like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, with a heavy heart, praying for them. So when Christmas break was over and they returned to campus, I said, I woke up on a certain night at 2 a.m. with a heavy heart to pray for you all. Did anything happen? They said, yeah, we had car trouble, and we had to stop and get a motel. I said, you slept in two different rooms, didn't you? They said, no. We were short on money. We slept in the same room. Oh, my goodness, you didn't do that, did you? Yeah, we did. And the guy said, well, I just want you to know, she slept in the bed and I slept on the couch. Well, okay. Now, were you all appropriate with each other? And they said, well, we didn't have sex, but we went a little too far with it. So that's not good. I can't tell you how many of my students at Moody did things like that. So now when I come to this of Ruth and Boaz being in a big building all night with each other alone, we expect the worst. No, this is what's called strategic righteousness. They made a point to do what's right. It can be done. You and I need to practice strategic righteousness. I don't want to do right because I just happen to fall into it, and I don't do anything wrong. I want to plan to do right. And so it can be done, and they did it. And so it was on that night that Ruth told him, I'm interested in you. And he said, yeah, I'm interested in you too. So now that brings us to chapter 4, where Boaz said at the end of chapter 3, now, there's one other man that has first claim on you, and that's a relative. He's a closer relative to Elimelech than I am. It's the brother of Elimelech. I'm just a nephew. So if he wants to marry you, it's appropriate, and I have to let him do it. So he's holding the woman that he wants to marry in an open palm. God might give him Ruth as a wife, God may not. May give that woman to another man. And so now in our chapter today, Boaz is going to inform this other redeemer. He's a closer redeemer than is Boaz. And God's going to turn that redeemer's heart to decline the invitation to marry Ruth. Okay, so let's go to chapter 4 and verse 1. In verse 1, the verse turns from the focus away from Naomi to Ruth and Boaz. Verse 1. Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, the gate of Bethlehem, and just then, look, the Redeemer was passing by, whom Boaz had mentioned the night before in chapter 3 to Ruth. Now, as he sits down, here comes the closer Redeemer. This is God's providential timing. And Boaz, requested, he's talking to the nearer Redeemer, please turn aside, sit down here, O hidden one. So he turned and sat down. Now, why does Boaz call him, O hidden one? Well, let's take a look at this in Hebrew. In Hebrew, what's translated O hidden one are these two Hebrew words, peloni almoni. Now, just listen to it. They rhyme. Peloni almoni. It's like our helter-skelter. Well, that has a rhyme to it, helter-skelter. And peloni almoni means it's like I'm talking to you, and I said, the other day I was talking to Mr. So-and-so. I'm not going to tell you his name. I probably have some good reason for concealing the name of the man that I was talking to. And so this is what Boaz is doing. Or this could be translated, O secretive one. Boaz senses this man is shy. He doesn't really appreciate being confronted in public as he is here. And so Boaz is going to do everything he can to remove possible humiliation from this man. Now, why is this man so secretive, this near Redeemer? Because of his irresponsible behavior. He has not even checked on the widow Naomi since she returned to Bethlehem. I think deep down in his heart, he doesn't care. He's thinking this way, if I check on Naomi and I find out she's needy, she's going to expect me to dig deep in my pocket and give her some money to help her pay her bills. And I really don't want to help her. I've got enough bills to pay. And here's what Scripture says. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction. Now the word visit is a loaded term in Greek. It means more than visit. It means C-A-R-E, to care for, to help them. And did this Mr. So-and-so, the near Redeemer, visit this widow to look into her needs? No, indeed, he didn't. So why does he want to remain secret? He refuses to function as a Redeemer, and he wants to lessen his public shame. Now that the family Redeemer is present, Boaz convenes in verse 2 a council of urban elders. Then he took 10 men from among the elders, from among the leaders of the city. 10 men. Now there were more elders than 10. Why did he select just 10? In the Bible, 10 is the number of completeness. Now just for a moment, I want you to look on the back side of your handout at the last, beginning with 18 through 22. The book is going to end on a genealogy, the family tree of Naomi, the family tree of Boaz, and how many people are mentioned there? 10. Now, there were far more relatives in that family tree than 10. But the writer selects 10 relatives. That's good enough. He gives an abbreviated family tree. Why 10? Well, 10 is the number of completeness.
I thought that was the number of judgment.
What's that?
I thought that was the number of judgment, and 7 was the number of completion.
You thought 10 was the number of what?
Judgment.
Oh, judgment?
Yeah.
No, 40. 40 is the number of judgment. It rained 40 days and 40 nights during Noah's flood. The Israelites were 40 years out in the wilderness. Jesus was tempted 40 days and 40 nights by the devil in the wilderness, etc. Moses was up on Sinai receiving the law for 40 days and 40 nights, while down in the valley, his people fell into idolatry with a golden calf. So 10 is the number of completion. Okay, let's go back to verse 2. Then he took 10 men from among the leaders of the city and requested, please be seated here. So they sat down. Verse 3. Then he addressed the Redeemer. Naomi, who has returned from the country of Moab, is putting up for sale the portion of the field that belonged to our relative Elimelech. Now, Boaz wants the Redeemer's attention on the field, not on Ruth at this point. Now, when Elimelech died in Moab, the field that he owned in Bethlehem passed to his widow Naomi. Naomi is a poor widow with no sons to support her, no grandsons, and now she is in need of money and she needs to sell the field for cash. Verse 4, Boaz continues, so for my part, I thought I should inform you by suggesting you to buy it in the presence of those sitting here. That is, in the presence of the leaders of my people. If you want to redeem it, if you want to buy it, do so. But if not, and it must be redeemed, Naomi needs money, please tell me that I may know, for there is no one else prior to you to redeem it, and I come after you. In other words, tell me whether or not you want to buy her a field. If you don't, then I will buy it. She needs money. And this Redeemer, unnamed Redeemer, says, I myself will redeem it. Now in verse 5, the story comes to a pivotal point. The initial word in verse 5, but, marks a contrast to the Redeemer's assuming this family matter concerns only a field. It doesn't. Ruth comes with the field. Notice verse 5. But Boaz continued, on the day when you buy the field from Naomi, you also are acquiring Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, to establish the deceased family on his estate. Now, when Elimelech died, the field passed to his older son, Mahlon. When Mahlon died, the field passed to his widow, Ruth, and to his widowed mother, Naomi, who are now co-owners. And the levirate marriage requires the Redeemer to marry his relative's widow, have a child by her, and the child and the field will be not the Redeemer's, it will belong to the son of the woman that he marries. Now the moment of decision has arrived in verse 6. The Redeemer responded. Now God's in this. In this case, that is, if I must marry Ruth and father a child through her, I am myself unable to redeem it, lest I spoil my own inheritance. You may personally have my right of redemption because I am unable to redeem it. So what are his reasons for declining to buy the field and marry Ruth? The purchased field will belong not to him or his children. It will belong to Ruth's child that he gives her, and not to his own children. Number 2, a child from a Moabite wife may be viewed, will probably be viewed by people as a half-breed. I don't want my offspring to be a mixture of two different races, two different people. 3, the Redeemer must support Ruth, her child, and Naomi. And what's going to happen? Number 4, his money will dwindle. This man's heart is in his money. 5, he fears marrying a Moabitess might end in death. The Jewish man Mahlon married Ruth, he died. The other son, Chilion, married a Moabitess, and he died. Now, if I marry this Moabitess, am I next on the list to go to an early grave? I don't want to take a chance on that. Number 6, his own children would inherit less. Number 7, he is simply unwilling to bear additional expenses. Now, verse 7 explains in advance the action to be taken in verse 8. Now, in earlier times in Israel, the following was the custom regarding the redemption and transfer of property. To validate any matter, the seller would remove his sandal and give it to the buyer. Now, what does that signify? By the seller handing his sandal to the buyer, it symbolized the transfer of property, and the seller no longer had the right to live on, to walk on the land that he's selling. Thus, this was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. Now, verse 8 resumes the story following the explanation of 7. So the Redeemer repeated to Boaz, "You may buy the land for yourself." Accordingly, he removed his sandal. The Redeemer is now legally free of his duty, and the path is now clear for Boaz to buy the field and to acquire Ruth as his wife. In verse 9, Boaz informs the witnesses of his intention of taking up the Redeemer's offer to buy the field. I'm in verse 9. Then Boaz announced to the elders and to all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I am acquiring all that belonged to Elimelech and all belonging to Chilion and Mahlon from the hand of Naomi." Now, what does that all mean? Land, houses on it, movable property, goods, etc., etc. Naomi is mentioned because she was intimately related to the 3 dead men. One was her husband, 2 were her sons. And Boaz gladly assumes this responsibility. This is what he had his heart set on. But in verse 10, Boaz comes to the heart of the matter. "And most importantly, I am acquiring Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon. I am myself acquiring her as my wife in order to perpetuate the deceased family on his estate, so that the deceased family may not disappear from among his relatives and from his hometown. You are witnesses." So to Boaz, the best part of this transaction is that he gets to marry the woman that his heart is set on. Boaz is a type of Jesus. Now, how is Boaz a type of Jesus? Well, Boaz was a kinsman. He was a helper related to somebody in his family that was desperately in need of help. How is Jesus our kinsman? He became human as we are. Remember, up in heaven before the incarnation, Jesus had one nature, divine. He was God, still is. But when he came down here, the Word became flesh. He became a human being. Now he is related to us as a Homo sapien. He is our near kinsman redeemer. God cares for all the Ruths in the world, an alien outcast. And that's why Paul says this in Ephesians 2. Jesus came and preached peace to you who are far off. Now he's speaking to Gentiles. The Ephesians were Gentiles. "So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household, the family of God, in whom the whole structure, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In Christ, by Christ, you also are being built up together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit." So what Paul is saying there is, you Gentiles used to be alienated from God. You had no part in the promises and the covenant of God. But Christ came and preached peace. He has brought you into intimate relationship with himself. Now you are sharers, just like we Jews are, in the promises and the covenant of God. You are members now, along with all of us Jewish believers, in the family of God. So Ruth has been now fully incorporated into the Hebrew nation, into this particular Jewish family. Now the audience responds in verse 11. In response, all the people who were at the gate and the elders exclaimed, "We are witnesses. And may the Lord make this woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah." Now let's think about that. Like Rachel and Leah. I'm asking you, which of those 2 women was the older, Rachel or Leah?
Leah.
Leah. So why do the people mention Rachel first?
Because he was Jacob's choice.
Yeah, she was. He didn't really want Leah. But remember, Rachel, was she as fruitful in having children as Leah? No, like Ruth, Leah too for some time was barren, who together built up the family of Israel. In other words, from these two women, and by the way, was Rachel Jewish?
Well, was his brother's children?
I don't think she wasn't Jewish. Now, she was related to Leah and Rachel. Abraham wanted a wife for Isaac.
She was Rebecca's brother's daughter, right? Rebecca's brother's daughter.
Is that right?
Yeah, Rebecca's brother's daughter.
Well,
And Isaac was her husband, and when Jacob got in trouble, he told her to go down to her brother's house, and he got in trouble with Esau.
yeah, I'm trying to remember. I know that's true, but I don't know if that speaks to the issue of whether Leah and Rachel, didn't they come from, who was their father? No, not Rahab. Who was the father of Rachel and Leah?
I don't know his name, but it was Rebecca's brother.
That's right. What?
Yeah, Laban.
Laban, that's right. Laban was a distant relative to Abraham. Abraham was the first Jew. But Laban, he was a real scoundrel. He wasn't Jewish. And so Leah and Rachel came from their father Laban. Am I not right about that? Yes. Okay, so another tie with Rachel is she wasn't Jewish, and Ruth was not Jewish. She was Moabite. Rachel was barren for a while. Ruth was barren for a while. And so verse 11 ends with the people saying, so that you do mighty deeds in Ephrathah, that's the district that Bethlehem is in, so that you are renowned in the town of Bethlehem. Now they're praying for Boaz, and still today in Bethlehem, Boaz is well known and has a good reputation. He's quite famous in Boaz. He's one of the few men from that little town that is famous. Jesus is the most famous, and then Boaz, and there's one other person that's quite famous from Bethlehem. Who? Oh, that's right, David. How could I forget that? Thank you. All right, now the audience has prayed for Ruth and Boaz in verse 11. Now in verse 12, the audience prays for their children. And may your family become like the family of Perez. Now, why Perez? Well, Perez had a levirate link to Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Judah. That's right. His family, the family of Perez, settled in Bethlehem. Both Tamar and Ruth were Gentiles. Both Tamar and Ruth were widows. Both Tamar and Ruth were refused in marriage. And both contributed to the Messianic family, whom Tamar bore for Judah, through the descendants whom the Lord will give you from this young woman. Now, the Hebrew language slows the action down in verse 13, so we see clearly 5 different actions, and here they are. Worthy Ruth married worthy Boaz. Remember, the word in Hebrew, worthy, is used only 2 times in this book, once of Ruth and once of Boaz, to indicate these 2 people were prepared by the hand of God for each other. Secondly, sex is reserved for marriage. Barren Ruth conceived. Obed sustains, as a man, Obed sustains, takes care of Ruth and Naomi in their old age. And from Obed came David, and from David came Jesus. All right, so let's look at this real quick. Verse 13. So Boaz married Ruth, and she became his wife. Then, only after marriage, he went into her, and the Lord granted her pregnancy so that she gave birth to a son. Now, surprisingly, in verses 14 through 17, the focus falls on Naomi because of the vast differences in her at the beginning of the book and at the end. Verse 14, then the women said to Naomi, praised be the Lord. Now, until this point, God has been lurking about in the shadows, unseen, not really noticed. Now God's going to step out of the shadows, and the light's going to fall on him, and we see that all through this book, the hand of God has been there, guiding people, guiding affairs to accomplish his plan. So they say, praise be the Lord. We know God's behind all of this. He has not left you without a redeemer today, Obed, who will take care of you in old age. Therefore, may his name be renowned throughout the land. The neighborhood women are correctly interpreting what is occurring. In verse 14, the women prayed for Naomi's grandson. In verse 15, they list wonderful benefits that Naomi will enjoy from him. May he also revive your spirits. Remember when she came back to Bethlehem, she was so downcast. And she said, don't anybody call me Naomi, call me Marah, bitter, because the Lord has dealt harshly with me. I left Bethlehem to go to Moab, and I was full. I had a husband, I had sons. I came back, I'm empty. I don't have a husband, I don't have any sons. So may he revive your spirits and sustain your old age. Take care of you. For your daughter-in-law who loves you has given him birth. She is better to you than 7 sons. So Ruth's love for Naomi was grafted into her son, so Obed loved his grandmother as Ruth did. In verse 16, Naomi begins to experience some of the benefits coming from her newborn Redeemer, promised in verse 15. Accordingly, Naomi took the lad in hand and placed him, not on her lap, on her breast, lovingly cuddled him. By the way, I have a picture here of Sarah. Remember, her husband Jonah fell ill, and we have 4 pictures of the newborn baby, and one is the mother has that baby, and where's that baby? On her breast. I mean, everything's covered up, but it just, not in her lap, lovingly resting, sleeping on his mother's breast, and that's what we have here. She became his nurse, that is, she took good care of him. So Naomi exemplifies a believer who surrenders life's unanswered, bitter questions and embraces the certainty of God's presence, confident that the Lord has done all things well. Now, verse 17, the newborn is named and identified by his later son and grandson. Then the neighborhood women proclaimed his significance, saying, a grandchild has been born for Naomi. And they named him Obed. What does Obed mean? One who serves, a servant. What a wonderful name to give to a person. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of, now what's the last word in your translation of verse 17 on my handout? What do you have? Obed. He became, no, that's not Obed. I made a mistake there. It should read like this. They named him Obed, and he became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. Grandfather of David. With what generosity does God bless those who seek refuge under his wings, as Ruth did? Now, verse 18 transitions from the book proper to its epilogue, which consists of a genealogy or family tree. Suddenly, the simple story of 2 struggling widows takes on a startling new dimension. It becomes woven into the fabric of Israel's national history. Who would have thought that Israel's royal dynasty would come through a Moabite immigrant? Verse 18. Now, these are the descendants of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Now, why is this book going to end on a family tree? What's the purpose of that? Number one, it preserves. What's that?
Jesus had to come through the lineage.
That's right. That's right. That's one of the purposes here. First of all, it preserves the marriage of Boaz and Ruth. Secondly, the mention of David helps set this book's date. Scholars, one of the things scholars do when they study a book is, well, when was it written? How do we date it? Well, the book, since it mentions David, obviously had to be written after David was born, not beforehand. Thirdly, it endorses David's rule since he was maligned by King Saul. Remember, no, David's going to be the king. Saul tried to kill him. He was jealous of him. He said a lot of bad things. And so to some people, now when David is coming to the throne, they think, oh, is this the bad guy that Saul hated and that Saul was after and tried to kill? Do we want him as a king? So this book is going to endorse David as a king. It's sort of saying, look, who's putting him on the throne here? It's God who's doing that. Fourthly, it's going to verify Genesis 49:10 that the Messiah comes from Judah. And it's going to point ahead to Israel's greatest king and greatest ruler. So, this little book doesn't end in a small Judean village called Bethlehem with an old grandmother cuddling a newborn grandson. It's pointing into the distant future, saying, this is what God has been working toward all along. Through this Moabite immigrant, Israel's greatest king will come, the world's greatest ruler will come. From David will eventually come his greater son, and that is Jesus. Bottom line, God was sovereign in the life of Ruth and Boaz. He is sovereign just as much in your life and mine. There's more to it. One other thing. Ruth and Boaz became a part of the overall plan of God, what God was doing through David and through the Messiah. Each of us has a small piece to play in the overall plan of God, what God is doing in history, what God is doing in our generation and in His Christian church. Okay, any questions or comments over this? Lurleen?
I have one for verse 16. It says, and Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom and became nurse unto it. I don't believe, I think she's saying Naomi handed the child to Ruth to give nurse to it. Because why in the world would a mother with milk, would a grandmother with no milk nurse that baby? So that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
I think she handed her to Ruth to nurse it.
Let's see here. That's verse 16?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me look at that.
Took the child and laid it in her bosom and became nurse unto it.
According to Naomi took the lad in hand and placed him on her breast, and she became his nurse. Let's see here. That's 2:16.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, 4:16.
Oh, 4. Okay. 4:16. Yeah, let me just take a quick look here. 4:16. And Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom and became nurse to it. Well, I think what we have to do is interpret who the her is, and laid it in her bosom. Is it her Naomi's bosom? Is it her Ruth's bosom? And so it's just a matter of interpretation. Now, I'm going to go with Naomi, because this is what the final verses are talking about. The emphasis is on Naomi. And again, why? Well, the vast difference between the way this book begins with Naomi's bad situation and the way it ends with God blessing her socks off. But then I'd also say about the word nurse. I think to nurse a child
The ESV say something different.
means more than just to breastfeed the child. Change the diaper, care for it, love it, spend time, bathe it, etc., etc., etc. I'm not a nurse. I don't want to be a nurse to a child. It's too hard. But there must be a lot that's involved in a nurse through just being.
I would agree. If Naomi did take the child and put it to her bosom and nursed it, she would be taking care of it.
Yeah.
She would not nurse that baby as an old woman when she's got a mother that's got no. I agree. Call me old fashioned.
The English version says something different.
What's it say?
Verse 16 says, then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse.
Okay. Well, I don't think that's what the Hebrew says. What translation is that?
That was the ESV. Now let me see what New King James says. New King James said, and Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom.
There you go.
And became nurse unto him.
Okay. Well, I think it's a small issue here. Who's the nurse here? I don't know why both women couldn't be the nurse. I just see here that Naomi she lost her two sons.
It don't mean she breastfed. It don't mean that Naomi breastfed.
Well, that's what we think.
Oh yeah. I don't think this is saying, if her refers to Naomi, I don't think it's all saying she breastfed. Everybody knows she couldn't do that. But she could certainly be nursed in a lot of other ways. Okay, I think we're out of time here. Let me just close in a quick word of prayer. Lord, it's encouraging to see that though bad things happen, you're involved. You allow bad things to happen, but you're so wise, so sovereign, you bring good out of bad. Now, may we keep that in mind as we go through our own hardships, that you do all things well, and you will eventually bring good out of the difficulty that we encounter. We're grateful that you are sovereign and in control of our life down to every hair on our head. So encourage us, Lord, especially as we go through trials, that we look down the road to the good that you're going to bring out of them. In Jesus' name, amen.